Hello, you're listening to Me and Paranormal You with your host, Ryan Singer. Because it's more fun to believe. Hey, everybody. Thank you for listening to another experience of Me and Paranormal You. This is your host and buddy, Ryan Singer. I'm excited today because we're going to have a conversation that I'm not exactly sure where it's going, but I do know that where it will end up is going to be a place that will be certainly magical and wonderful. I've got Jim Vernon with me today, who's a professor of philosophy, Continental philosophy, if I'm not mistaken, is one of
Yeah.
your areas, Jim, and
Mhm.
amongst a bunch of other things. And I wonder if we're going to, because I've been trying to dig in and do some background, and I'm wondering if we're going to talk about the aesthetics of Phish, of the band Phish. I mean, is that something that
Sure.
you've got some history and thinking and writing on that, right?
Yeah, a little. So leading there. Yeah, that's
Oh, okay.
the project for the year. And so, yeah.
Oh, hell yeah. Well, thanks for joining me today. How's it going?
No problem. It's a pleasure. Yeah, yeah. Nice to be here.
Um, well, I think one of the things that we probably, I mean, I think one of your, correct me if I'm wrong, but one of your areas of focus is Hegel, right? And I don't know, is it George or is it Jorg or
Yeah,
what is
yeah,
it?
it's Georg.
Oh, Georg. So
Georg
neither
Hegel.
of the
Yeah,
two.
yeah. So yeah. Um, but yeah, he's my main concentration, and has been, for 25 years or whatever. So, and then I do sidebar things to Hegel. Um, so yeah.
Okay, cool. And so Hegel uh is it fair to say that he's one of the, I mean, did he start German idealism?
Uh,
Uh
didn't start it, but kind of finished it. Was
oh,
was
okay.
kind of became the dominant figure. So like that name is kind of retroactive for the most part. You're gathering people under a heading the way often happens. The sort of first big person was Kant, um, and then there's sort of like responses to Kant's philosophy. So Kant kind of uh, in the late 18th century kind of completely shocks the philosophical world, uh, turns everything on its head, more or less, and creates a system of philosophy that tries to defend the empirical science of his day, post-Newtonian, yeah, just post-Newtonian scientific investigation, uh, not by turning to an objective world outside the subject, but by focusing on the universal structures of consciousness itself. So this was a classic problem in philosophy is if our only access to the empirical world is through our senses, doesn't that mean everything that we experience in the world is tainted by subjectivity? And therefore, when we speak of objectivity, we're kind of just speaking incorrectly. So the school of philosophy known as empiricism, which was one of the two big schools in the preceding couple of centuries, uh, was all kind of skeptical about science. It kind of believed that if you're a strict empiricist and you believe knowledge comes through experience, there kind of is no access to a non-subjective world. And therefore, you kind of have to give up hope that you could have something like real objective truth. And Kant wanting to preserve that was like, well, what if there was something universal in the subject as opposed to in the world? What if there were necessary structures of cognition that kind of constrained the possibility of experiencing a world? And he tried to develop a theory of that universal structure of mind that any empirical world would have to have. And that empirical structure was more or less the structure of physical causality. It was, this one time order from past to future. Everything happens in a causal order, but that's in you, not in anything outside you. Um, so the problem with Kant's philosophy is like he saved science, but by reducing it all to from my perspective, as far
Oh,
as I
wow.
can tell, like everything.
Here's what I'm thinking.
Yeah,
Wow, this, and we're off and running. I mean,
yeah,
this idea too is one of the things that just like really popped into my brain as you're saying that too was this idea of objective truth, right? And I know in the world of comedy and in the world of paranormal, for me, there's such a debate about the objective truth, whether something is good or something is real, and it's just always a moving target as far as I'm concerned. But it makes me wonder in the modern age if we're having a series of, multiple, I don't know what Kant would say about like these simultaneously parallel objective truths that are existing for different people. And it's a different truth, but it's objective, right? At least in their mind. Like, is there a difference? Like when it does Kant, is there a difference, I think, between like what the subject believes is objective truth and an actual objective truth? Or is that the whole point of this? Like, there's no really way because it all gets filtered through us.
Yeah, this is why Kant's sort of a difficult problem in philosophy, because his idea is that you can save science by locating the structures of objectivity within cognition itself. So science is the sort of like gold standard for what counts as objective knowledge, but it's no longer about a world outside the subject, and therefore science is kind of constrained to the mind of the individual person doing it. Like in his sort of big book on the theory of knowledge called The Critique of Pure Reason, uh, the few times he mentions other subjects, it's kind of like, well, you're not even sure they're real. You're sure you're seeing bodies in space. You're sure they're acting in certain ways. You're sure you interpret them as having consciousness. But since you can't see somebody else's consciousness, all you can really do is describe them empirically according to laws that are the laws of cognition. Anything else is a kind of presupposition. Um, so where a lot of the post-Kantian idealists come in, and Hegel is this sort of, just leaving that as I'm talking about Hegel, Hegel tries to, effectively find a way to figure out how would you ever know there's another person? How would you ever, why have the seeming categories of knowledge changed across historical time? So what Hegel tries to do is investigate experience, at least in his early work, and figure out or develop a kind of both individual psychological history as well as like grand cross-temporal human history as to where we would get concepts that seem fundamental to knowledge. So in his sort of early contribution was called the phenomenology of spirit or mind. It depends how it's translated. But the phenomenology sort of starts with, well, pretend you're experiencing anything at all, but taking for granted it's outside you. And then you just investigate, like, what does it even mean to make that judgment, to think there's something not you? And the weeds on this, but there's a whole, like, it's 700 more pages of developing the contradictions within any attempt to know something outside of you, from a patch of color on a curtain to an object with properties, like, something that has an identity, but you can only see the colors and shapes it has. Like, when you see a table, you sort of see, a brown lid, you see legs, you see a certain sheen, you see a wood grain, but you don't see its tableness. You don't see the thing that holds it together and says, call me something unified. You see all these different aspects. So there's a problem. Like, is a thing its properties, or is a thing the kind of unity that holds those properties together? And what happens from taking one of those more seriously than the other? What kind of tensions arise? And he sort of builds this history across the story across both individual psychology and human history as to how we got different senses of what an object or a world or an account of the good or something like that sort of evolves across historical time. That's a long-winded story, but the rough idea is that what Hegel, he sort of the most grandiose project in philosophical history, I think, he tries to find a way of like making one big system out of all the forms of logical thinking, all the aspects nature has, the entire history of human art, the entire history of human warfare, the entire history of human religion. And he tries to find some way of making it all one big system where you can line up in logical order why each thing took place, when it did, before and after what arose, before and after it arose, and so on and so on.
Wow.
So for effectively for a while, a short period, everyone thinks Hegel just solved philosophy. And then all philosophy became sort of reactions to Hegel. So people like Nietzsche and Kierkegaard are people who like try to find a way around Hegel, try to condemn Hegel, try to find a way to operate on, to find what's missing from the system, and then like exploit that missing piece as like, well, here's a way of escaping it. Now Hegel's not a big name in philosophy at all for the most part. It's very much a minority taste. But for a brief period in the 19th century, he was sort of top dog, at least in
Wow.
where people spoke German. Um, but
That
yeah.
is, no big whoop, just trying to figure out everything all at once,
Mhm.
everywhere, like that movie. That's, I mean, there's something, there's something about idealism for me that it just seems so damn appealing. But for how and something I've never understood too, and like what you're talking about, like how can you see the tableness or what it makes the table? I've always wondered, how do I ever know that anyone else is seeing the same color I'm seeing or the exact same object I'm seeing, right? And I guess one of the ways that we can do that is maybe by drawing, like, oh, okay, let's sit down and both draw what we see, but then am I seeing the same shape of their drawing that they drew, that they see, so there's really no way to ever really know. And I guess you could maybe drive yourself mad with it, thinking that there's no realness or there's no, I don't know, shared reality. uh
I mean, the sort of inaugural gesture of modern philosophy is often considered to be Descartes' Meditations, uh, which is an attempt to find some secure linchpin of objective knowledge, like a thing that can't be doubted, a thing there's no possible way that anyone could doubt. And he starts figuring out what in his experience is doubtful. It's like sometimes when I look at objects, I guess what they are wrong. Like I see a shadow, I think it's a person, it was a shadow. So obviously perception is doubtful. It could be that like a lot of what I perceive is just not real. It's just in my imagination or something. And he continues that way until he eventually says, like, well, how do I know there's not like an evil demon just making me hallucinate constantly? The modern variant is how I know I'm not a brain in a vat. Like in what all that must be doubtful. Experience itself must be doubtful. 2 + 2 = 4 must be doubtful. But it's always possible there's some evil genius tricking me into believing that's true, and 2 + 2 in fact equals 5, and everyone's just fooled, including me. Uh, so what he gets down to is the only thing I can't doubt is that I'm doubting. Like I have to have the thought of like everything is doubtful. But that's one thing I can't stop thinking whether I'm believing what I see is true or that I believe is true. The one thing I'm doing in both cases is thinking. Uh, so that's the famous line, I think, therefore I am. And one thing I can't doubt is that for this whole process to take place, I must at least exist as a thinking thing. Um, the reason this is the inaugural moment of modern philosophy is because he doesn't put God first, as every previous philosopher would have done, or at least the sort of post-Christian philosophers would have done. He puts himself first. So the one thing he can't doubt is what's going on in his own mind.
yeah.
Um, then the question is, well, is there anything else I know? And there's a very unsatisfying argument that says, like, one of the things in my head floating around is an idea of God. That idea is so big I couldn't make it up, and therefore it must have been put in me by someone, and the only one that could do that is God. Uh, God wouldn't deceive me, therefore I shouldn't doubt the world. It must exist in every way. But the idea is like, there's this kind of
Yeah.
uh, uh, we put the subject before God, but God is the guarantee that our experience outside is true.
Hmm.
Um, so uh, uh, like often it's considered Descartes kind of got it right. Not that he's right about the God stuff, but he was right that there's no non kind of question begging justification for other people having the same experience as you. There are only kinds of approximations you can make. Um, and that's just a problem. Like mostly what we do is ignore that aspect. But even, yesterday there was the whole Chomsky death hoax, and so it's in my mind. But Chomsky used to say, nobody's ever like gotten around Descartes' radical doubt. You just kind of have to like get on as best you can without worrying about those problems, but they remain deep and serious problems philosophically. It's just
Yeah, yeah.
no way
You just have
around
to
them.
get on the best you can. I mean, I feel like it's such a great motto, I think, for so much. Now when you dedicate your life to thought, right? This is to me something that's really fascinating and interesting. I once upon a time, I ended up going to school getting my creative writing degree, and I was like, I really want to just kind of get my master's degree in maybe religious studies because I was fascinated by just the reason and the advent and the need for religion, right? And in religious thought. And then I was like, and then after I do that, I can maybe get my PhD in, philosophy. So I can get like the 3 degrees that like writing, religion, and philosophy, the 3 degrees that will make it impossible for me to like go get some job I hate because nobody's going to hire this guy, right? Who's got the triumvirate of like whimsical and let's sit around and think about stuff kind of degrees, right? But or teaching or something like that. But it was too much of a commitment for me because um to the thought of it all is great. Like I sometimes will joke that like thinking about consciousness blows my mind, right? Like which is the thing itself that I'm even thinking about. But what is the like? It had to be ever since you were. I mean, I don't want to say had to be, but ever since you were a kid, were you in the clouds? Were you a head in the clouds kind of kid, or were you? Or did you want to like? Did you want to understand? Was it coming from that angle?
I'm not even sure. It feels often like I fell kind of backwards into this career. Like I don't come from an academic family. Most I didn't know many people growing up who eventually went on to graduate school. It was like 3 people I knew, I think. A lot of my friends dropped out, and like so, like it was. Um, I don't quite remember how I got here. Besides, like part of it was like I wanted to avoid one of those jobs that you just hate going to all the time, and staying in school was a way of doing that. Why I chose something that had almost no career path at the end. And then I was quite lucky to get the job I did at the time I did. There's often very, very brutal periods, like right now in academic hiring, so where lots of eminently qualified people are left struggling on the market. So yeah, I just feel kind of lucky to have gotten in a certain sense. I did kind of, and it was not until graduate school that I decided to take it seriously. So partially it was just, I liked books. My first degree was in literature and religion. So I came to philosophy late in my master's. Um, and I only ended up there because I was a religious studies major at an institution where one of the streams you could major in was philosophy of religion. And that's the one I majored in. And so it turned out there were no other places you could do that. So when I wanted to go on, I had to go to philosophy because I was reading people like Kierkegaard and Nietzsche. I hadn't encountered Hegel yet. Um, uh, but I think probably, yeah. I spent a lot of time thinking about stuff other than the kind of things that would qualify you for the majority of jobs in late capitalism. And so once I escaped to graduate school, I kind of realized I had to sort of like try really hard to be able to stay in because it was really easy to pop back out again. And I worked a lot of those jobs while I was in grad school. Like I worked in an auto parts plant and construction sites and things like that. And so there was a lot of trying to escape uh, that mode. Yeah.
Yeah, you're playing for keeps once you get that far in. It's you kind of have to really buckle in and I guess do the work, right? And
Mhm.
I mean, I don't know where you came in before all of this, like philosophically, or just, and by that, what I mean is like, how'd you view the world, or was it something that you paid much attention to?
Uh, I mean, uh, maybe the way I put it is that like I have mostly been interested in ways of seeing the world. So like I didn't enter philosophy with any kind of commitment to an idea of like views I wanted to defend or schools of philosophy I want to investigate. I kind of wanted to know all of them. And so my graduate school existence, I sort of took double the number of courses required because I wanted to just learn a bunch of things before I wrote anything. And I still have that problem where I have trouble writing because I always think there's one more thing I have to know before I can put pen to paper. Uh, but like, I kind of enjoy putting on another way of viewing the world. And so getting very deeply involved in a thinker or a school or a kind of subcultural viewpoint, and doing nothing but research that for as long as I can, until I feel like I've kind of understood how the world looks a little bit differently. And so, yeah, again, that's kind of a weird, vague answer, but my general interest in philosophy is like, how many plausible ways of viewing the world are there? Yeah. So,
Well, I think that's very apropos for today's society, considering it seems like we're living in a very specific time where, at least in the way you're able to do it, because I'm sure it's always been this way, right? But it just seems, because we're alive right now, so we think it's special for us. But there's so many different realities for people to be living in, right? And basically, what that means is just there are people who are seeing the world a very specific way, and they're trying to like get everybody else to be like, hey, don't you see this is a world we're living in? You need to wake up, right? And other people are like, you need to wake up, you're a maniac, this is the world we're living in. And whether it's fractured media, which has created access to the multidimensional worldview, or all the different dimensions that people can be living in while walking side by side next to one another. But I'm sure it was always kind of that way to a certain degree, right? With like the way some people saw the world as being void of all God, and then walking next to on the street with someone who was so hyper religious that they thought that person was a maniac, and vice versa.
yeah, I mean, one of the things that I think drew me to Hegel's position is, as I mentioned, that grand project is partially to figure out, well, if there are hundreds of thousands to millions of people who believe a certain set of religious principles or ethical principles, it doesn't mean they're correct, but it must mean there's something in there which has a kind of
Yeah.
value to it. And the same for every other. So there must be some way of thinking about, their relative relationship to each other, the way in which there's reason in all of them, if partial reason, and that, the closest thing to be able to get to an objective perspective is something that incorporates the best of all of them. So you can see that something was required as a building block for what came after, or you can see that something is a necessary corrective or challenge to the dominance of some idea at a certain point. So one of the things I like about his view is the sort of commitment to the rationality of those with perspectives that at first seem alien to you. Which again doesn't mean accepting everybody's views or saying that clearly offensive or clearly ignorant views are somehow valid or valuable. But it does mean that they may have within them some kind of rational kernel, as the phrase got used sort of after Hegel. You're looking for the rational kernel of what's going on in a position, and then the more general position that might hold them together.
Wow. I mean, because there is something to be said for, yeah, like I think there's something right about that. If there's like, hundreds of thousands or millions of people who are all drawn to something, what is the benefit of that thing? Obviously, there's something in there. There's a kernel of something in there that deeply resonates. And I don't know, trying to find a through line through it all. I don't know if that's a sentence I should be saying out loud again, a through line through it all. But is that like the perennial philosophy? Like, would that be one of these like kernels that I think might that seems to, at least from my very limited understanding of a lot of this stuff, is the thing that one of these core truths that appears throughout different religions over and over and over and over again in a very similar form. Is that, would that come close to being what the kernel is, or would it be something more like needing to find a purpose for one's life, or would it be needing some kind of anchor of morality, even though I don't think we need religion for that personally, but would it be any of those?
So like is a lot there. So and again, it depends whether we're talking about Hegel or whether we're talking about just sort of general life stuff. But Hegel's is not an advocate of the perennial philosophy, nor does he think there's sort of like the same kernel that exists sort of in every culture or something like that. I mean, the very quick thing to say about Hegel is that for Hegel, the core of everything is the fact that human beings are free, which is a bit weird and mysterious. So like the very fact that human beings have something in them seemingly not determined by material forces. Uh, I'm reserving language like that we can choose, that we can act, because like for Hegel, the sort of problem of human history is figuring out what it means to be free.
Hmm.
The sort of ongoing problem humanity faces is like, what does a free being do? Or how does a free being understand what it is? So the maybe the most famous line in all of Hegel is that, like, world history is the sort of unfolding narrative of humanity's coming to understand itself self-consciously as a free entity. And so uh, you can look at Egyptian culture and following it, Greek culture and following it, Roman culture, following it, the Islamic culture as it moves to the dominance of Europe, and as it moves, he sort of guesses in 1830 America is going to be the next place where freedom gets its latest understanding. These are purely material. They're interesting books of history written without human beings as a central thing. Like we just look at how nutrients come in and out of cities, or we look at how like geology changes, how volcanoes drive population somewhere, or something like that. There's all kinds of ways of thinking about history. Uh, uh, Hegel suggests that one thing human beings sort of like necessarily do and kind of should do is think of history as the progressive self-understanding of humanity unfolding. So we can look back at the achievements of previous civilizations as building blocks on the way to our current understanding, which some people like myself think opens up the way of saying, well, that means future understandings are going to arise. So you have to think about yourself as part of an ongoing history, and an ongoing history that, at least from the perspective of those who have to live it, unfolds as we're coming to a better understanding of who we are, not a worse one. Even if the next stage is going to wipe away a lot of our current understanding, even if it's going to overturn a lot of what we currently take to be vital to who we are as human. Uh, Much as the advent of Christianity in the world changed the way human beings in the parts of the world it was affecting thought of themselves. Whatever happens 1,000 years from now will change how we think about our understanding of ourselves. And all of those, you can say, have some rational kernel that fed into how we have come to understand who we are. In practice, of course, that does happen through contingent random actions. It happens when a general gets angry and decides to invade a town, and some kind of conquering happens, and some kind of cultural crossover takes place that expands both cultures, and they get a different understanding of who they are. None of it happens for progress. None of it happens as a rational process. It all happens, as Hegel says, through a kind of combination of new ideas being born, but being brought into the world through the passionate actions of individuals acting for private motives.
Hmm.
So
Wow.
it's one of those, like, like I've written a little bit about, Martin Luther King was a big fan of Hegel's philosophy of history. And he would often write this way, that like if you want to know like what who's to be credited for a lot of advances in civil rights, his response was Bull Connor, the horrible sheriff in Selma who attacked all the protesters, because that without that attack, there wouldn't have been the laser light focus of the country on it. The injustice of segregation wouldn't have been so starkly exposed. So there's nothing good about the actions of Bull Connor in that era, but they were part of the historical process that brought an inevitable idea created by decades and decades of struggle that crystallized it in a certain moment, and created a change that all of us look back on as progressive. And so you had people with the correct idea. You had King and Parks and Vernon Johns and all the people involved in Birmingham, all the people involved in the civil rights movement, Bayard Rustin and others. But you also had on the other side those struggling against them. And it's the contest between those two sides that produced the progressive change that we all embrace and we all interpret our own being through. Um,
Wow.
uh,
I mean, I can't help but think about, conflict being critical to story. And and sometimes I wonder if, everything isn't just, some kind of story that's unfolding, right? And, every single thing is just the story of existence. And in the way this is unfolding, from what I understand, what you're saying about Hegel is, I don't know if I'm crazy, but it sounds very hopeful to me. It's like
yeah.
a hopeful. It inspires hope in me to think about the continuing unfolding of understanding what it is to be human or to be a free creature or whatever it is we are.
Mhm. Yeah, King liked to use the phrase, the moral arc of the universe is long, but it bends towards justice. That
Oh
is,
yeah.
you need to have the kind of hope in it. And the hope comes from understanding that it's part of a long process, that things have looked far worse than they have in the past than they do now. And out of periods of utter bleakness came the very things we think of as the beacons of light in the history of humanity. Um, the same time period, again, these weren't Hegel people, but like, I've been revisiting the beatniks in the last couple of weeks, and so they're in my mind. But if you ask people like Michael McClure, Allen Ginsberg about like whether they imagine there would have been this massive transformation that led to the Beat generation and the hippies and everything afterwards, they were like, we didn't think we were going to live past the 1950s. Like the bomb had just dropped. We were hiding under our desks in school. Like we all thought we were, effectively going to die within a couple of years. It's why we were doing these sort of desperate actions. And then just a decade later, one of the second generation beat poets, guy named Ed Sanders, who I worked a bit on, I interviewed him once and he said, I thought we were going to solve poverty by the time I was 50. Like it looked like 10 years later, like we were on this trajectory that was never going to end, that transformative decade from 55 to 65. That really just, the Civil Rights Act, the Voting Rights Act, incredible transformations. And that came from what looked like the most dismal period in human history, the sort of repressive conformist 1950s. And so like in the middle of a time period, it can always look as desperate and unhopeful as possible. But in the broad sweep of history, at least, this is the hopeful side of Hegel, or what comes out of Hegel's theory is um, uh, in the ongoing unfolding history of humanity, that's a repeated process, is that the most amazing transformations take place after the bleakest conflicts.
Hmm.
Which again doesn't mean it justifies those conflicts,
Yeah.
although it often can read like that. And there are lots of critiques of Hegel that suggest it. Um, uh, it's more, it's less, way of putting it is not like we had to go through those things to produce the good. It's more we had to go
Yeah,
through
you
those
can't
things
just
to produce
assume
the
everybody
good.
else is going to do everything for you.
Yeah. And it's also like, we're a flawed species that doesn't, we're, the phrase from your special I like quite a lot is the phrase that like we're all like, a bunch of magical rocks walking around in meat suits, brought to life a miracle of consciousness. And the problem is like both those things are true. And this is kind of the perennial philosophy that we are freedom and reason, the capacity for self-determination and self-transformation. And we're also these terrible empirical entities that have desires and drives and habits and fears and anxieties and traumas that and the interaction between those two aspects, the ability to try to overcome some of the meat suit to allow some of the magic of consciousness to express itself more fully or even understand itself more fully. That kind of conflict is almost the conflict of history. It's like all those passions sort of produce the next phase of consciousness, or all those conflicts produce the next stage in progress, which is very, as I'm a very lucky individual, but even I can, on a daily basis, you think this has to happen. What's happening around you? There's this feeling of like all this.
Yeah.
but it's um, the kind of like pedagogical aspect of Hegel is like, well, if we understood ourselves as a history more, we might be less prone to undergo so many deviations or such deep struggles to produce the next phases, that the process could become more self-conscious. This
Yeah.
was Hegel's hope after the French Revolution, and to actually write down on a piece of paper, we're all equally free. You put that in a constitutional document and you call it the Declaration of the Rights of Man, like that should create like a substantive enough change that we could become more consciously aware. But of course, the first thing France does is reaffirm its commitment to slavery outside of France, and then you get more conflict, and you get the brilliant Haitian Revolution. So all these, yeah, this is a long-winded answer, but all this conflict is somehow necessary for us, given our stage of self-understanding.
Wow.
And so marveling at how far we've come may be one of the ways we can go faster.
Yeah. I'd love,
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, I'd love to just, I think we could all sit down and probably write 5 to 10 things down on a piece of paper that all of us just universally agree would be great. And then we just do it. There's anyway, we got to take a quick break, Jim, and then we're going to
Sure,
come
yeah.
back, and I want to throw like the fear of death, and it's um and it's driving in all the different forces that it may drive. And then I also want to talk about maybe, when it comes to uh, Hegel or idealism or empiricism, I want to talk about maybe like where are the pockets for the supernatural, and, potentially, these things have obviously been, there's obviously some kernel inside, this belief in the paranormal, as well as many people just are continuing drawn, at least as far as like Hegel would be concerned. There's obviously something going on there as well. So we're going to be right back. And just as a reminder, patreon.com/Ryan Singer, $3 a month gets you no commercials, none of these late stage capitalism ads that I have no idea what you'll be hearing. But remember, you can hit the fast forward button and hear more great conversation. I got Jim Vernon joining me. We'll be right back. Okay, we're back. And wow. Okay, so I mean, I'm hopeful with this outlook of the unfolding of, history is just a reflection of, our unfolding understanding of ourselves to a certain degree. I do so many times. I just wish we could just cut the bullshit and just get right to it and just be like you said. I mean, what you referenced is having a better understanding of our history would help us to be more self-conscious about making these changes, right? And I mean, which is just that old phrase, if you don't know the past, you're doomed to repeat it. Essentially, is that where that comes from?
I'm not sure if the relation is to that phrase or not. And I mean, and this is a bit extrapolating from Hegel, so that wouldn't be something he'd say.
Oh, okay.
He identified, various ways of writing history. The one I'm talking about is what he calls philosophical history, which is understanding history kind of from its own concept, which he thinks is freedom. So it's how it would differ from, say, like like a geological history of the Earth or a biological history of the species. Is he thinks of history really as beginning when human beings first indicated their freedom, the sort of first revelations of art, the first revelations of like law giving. So he wasn't privy to he lived through the translation of Egyptian hieroglyphs or the early translation of them. So like a lot of the stuff we would think of as what he might look to, he wouldn't even know about, like it was happening during his lifetime. But one to bring the conversation to the paranormal, this is one thing Hegel, especially towards the end of his life, was concerned about, was the kind of rise of scientific materialism as the dominant self-understanding. So we would kind of remove from our understanding of the species the part that isn't the meat suit. That we would think of consciousness not as something that was, in a phrase he wasn't hesitant to use, supernatural. So Hegel had a kind of, there's very little research on this. There's only a couple of books and articles on it. But Hegel had like a complicated relationship to lots of paranormal stuff during his day. So he was, for example, quite critical of astrology, but he defended mesmerism decades after it had been debunked. Uh, and his philosophy of nature, which is sort of his attempt to try to like derive the objective categories of an external world from the most basic. Imagine there's like a point outside of you, and how that point might become a line, it might become a plane, it might become space where that is contained, and then might build up to rocks and organisms and everything else. In that book, the foil is Newton, who he keeps referring to as like a terrible physicist compared to his predecessors. And uh, uh, well, he studied chemistry deeply and lived through the revolutions in chemistry. He tried to get people to like reaffirm the four traditional elements instead of like making chemical elements. He's like, those aren't elementary. Elements are kind of rational categories of earth, air, water, fire. So he was at the same time the sort of like one of the most aggressive partisans of aspects of the Enlightenment of his day, and also had a reputation for affirming a bunch of things people thought had already been outmoded by that time. And part of it seems to be his concern to preserve, at least an equal voice for the consciousness part of the tension with the meat suit. And he saw, on the materialist point of view, an attempt to sort of just reduce it to the meat. As Jung kind of puts it, that the point of science was to explain away. Like you were trying to eliminate from the scientific story anything that reeked of magic or spirit. And Hegel was always trying to show that they paired nicely together, that they in a way needed each other, that science needed the scientist as much as the scientist needed, a meat-filled world of rocks to investigate or something like that.
Wow. Yeah, I mean, I was going to say Hegel sounds pro-witch over here. Trying to reaffirm the four elements, traditional elements, and I mean, I don't know where you stand on all this as far as, or even if you would self-identify yourself in a camp, because the way you talked about, the interest of, looking through all these different lenses to, and, the interest in understanding all the different ways to understand the world. I'm very new to that. I can't believe it took me, I don't know, just a handful of few years back or whatever it was where I first even stumbled upon really what idealism was. And I mean, for me, it was just this idea of, because I think a lot of paranormal people who might be listening to this are, myself included, are interested in, okay, not necessarily on purpose, but like, okay, well, which viewpoint works best for me to reverse engineer and make sure that all these things I can believe in actually fit, right? And as opposed to kind of discovering something and then maybe changing our minds. And for me, idealism was maybe the closest thing I'd found in a while. I do believe consciousness is the connective tissue between, everything. But, it's not to say that I won't change my mind 2 years from now, I suppose. But which camp are you? Do you find yourself more interested in at least studying at this time?
Like certainly all of my interests are in, uh, the how to put this, like everyone I take a deep and serious interest in is in some way thinking about the problem of the magic of consciousness and the meat suit and how they relate to each other. That forms the fulcrum of what they do. Um, uh, like one of my most, I'm only sort of new at looking at Hegel through this angle in the last year or so. I somehow stumbled upon, I didn't know anything about the history of ceremonial magic. And I'm not quite sure how I started this process, but I just started to read about it. It seemed interesting. I started to get heavily into it. And Hegel has this sort of like weird temporal existence where it's sort of, he's in the period between two magic revivals. So in the Renaissance, the early Hermetic texts are kind of discovered and translated for the first real time. And magic becomes something the educated elite are all obsessed with. But again, this is very potted, so there's lots of data I'm going to get wrong here probably. But the idea is a phenomenon arises what's known as natural magic. So like a cult just means secret. And occult powers and things are therefore just the stuff in things you don't see. So like in the broad sense of occult, a force like gravity is kind of an occult force. Its effects can be seen, but you can't pull gravity out of those effects and look at it and investigate it. It's occulted within, it's only seen by observation of the objects that are affected by it. And natural magic was just this hunt for those occult forces. We have a shared interest in crystals. And so like old crystal magic was kind of, well, those crystals have occult powers in them, so grind them up and eat them. Because you want to get those powers in you, or, like make a poultice out of the grind and put it on a wound so that it heals it best because the powers are right in it. Newton comes along, and Newton has heavy interest in alchemy and magic. He's, as John Kenneth Galbraith said, he was not the first of the scientists, but the last of the magicians. But after Newton, it's like, well, we don't need all that anymore because now we have a theory, mathematically describes things probably accurately, and we can kind of cleave off all that old magic stuff. So there's a period when Hegel is writing when magic is not treated seriously by anybody in the academic sphere. It's the thing we just outmoded because we got Newton and post-Newton science now. And Hegel's making all these claims that Paracelsus is a superior scientist to Newton and all kinds of sort of like random, we should go back to that old way. Hegel dies in 1831, and then in the 1850s, magic begins a second revival with the work of Eliphas Levi, who gathered up things like the pentagram rituals and hexagram rituals that are in broad use now. And his work leads to a huge revival of magic in Europe with the Golden Dawn, where people like Yeats and Aleister Crowley and Israel Regardie all sort of came out of. And magic suddenly at that point becomes all about manifesting your will. So like Crowley defines magic as the art and science of causing change to occur in accordance with will. And when asked, like, doesn't that mean like any voluntary, deliberate act is a magical act? His answer is yes. The question is finding out whether or not what you did was actually deliberate. Like, how would you go about figuring out what it meant to actualize your will? But magic looks wholly different in the 19th century than it does during the Renaissance. Partially, I think, because of the German idealists with their incredible emphasis on the human being as free. This is the thing you get in Kant. This is the thing you get in Fichte. It's a giant theme in German idealism. The entire focus is on human freedom. And I don't think it's accidental that as like scientific materialism becomes more and more dominant, the idea that we're free becomes more and more magical. It becomes more and more of a paranormal claim than it does a normal one.
Oh, wow.
And so, again, I'm new to looking at this, but something tells me that what's at stake in Hegel's contribution is, in a way, revealing that we're going to have to start thinking about this as supernatural, despite the fact that it kind of isn't. It's just, you could boil idealism in all its varieties down to one essential thesis, which is that consciousness is real. It's as real as anything else. It doesn't require reduction to some real reality, but the thoughts and feelings you have are as real as the body you have and the table you're sitting in front of. And that, there are philosophers, many philosophers who've worked to prove consciousness isn't real. It's a position known as eliminative materialism. You want to reduce as far as possible all the non-material stuff out of the world. And the big one is consciousness. So we have to kind of get rid of that and say people don't actually have beliefs. It's kind of a trick or an illusion that they have beliefs.
Oh, wow. I mean, it also strikes me of, we're a funny creature, like how special we think we are to the degree of like, well, if we can't define or truly understand something, it must be magic, or like it must be like outside of the normal, right? Because we can define and understand everything. And And then that gets taken to the next level of, well, if we can't define or understand something, then it's obviously not real, and someone is misrepresenting it or misunderstanding something that we can understand or define as being real. And they just think it's this other thing. Like you hear this a lot in the world of the paranormal. Oh, you thought that was a ghost, but it's not. It's, or whatever. You'll hear that a lot on the skeptical side of the argument. Well, let me tell you what you really saw, even though I wasn't there.
Mm-hmm.
But wow, that just blows my mind to think that there are people that actually believe or think it's more likely that there is no such thing as consciousness. So I mean, I don't know.
Again, it's a small taste in philosophy. It's not the
Okay, I was going to say, like, I'd be curious to know where they're coming for. Like, well, how do thoughts and creativity fall into the mix for them?
I mean, the idea there is that everything kind of reduces to operations of the brain, like nothing else is happening in addition. So, like when you're talking about a belief, you're talking about a state of the brain. And so there's like a one-to-one relationship between them, and it really just means you're referring to this phenomena that's happening, and everything else is kind of epiphenomenal. Everything else is just kind of that it's not as real as that. The most interesting to me is that as magic is reborn in the 19th century. Rapidly the idea becomes, well, why don't we just apply scientific principles to the study of consciousness without trying to reduce it to the meat? So the motto of Aleister Crowley's journal, The Equinox, he put it in a poem, is to people who say like you're just believing those old religious ideas, or you're not really modern. His little poem was, "We place no reliance on virgin or pigeon. The method is science, the aim is religion." So the idea is like just take the phenomena of consciousness, what it can do, if anything, magically, and this is why magicians keep diaries, because that's like your lab notebook. I did 3 pentagram rituals today. The moon was in this phase. The weather was hot. It was during the week of my birth sign. What was the effect? I felt a bit hungry afterwards. I had a mild synchronicity after. Nothing to write home about. Okay, try it again tomorrow, and we'll see what other conditions, if it affects it at all. And after years, you figure out, okay, that ritual doesn't do anything. Let's try another one. But that's kind of the method of magic, is kind of like it's not a, say these words and this will happen. It's kind of investigating what happens when your consciousness engages with its environment through a set of practices, and scientifically study whether or not it really worked, or did it work the way you wanted it to, or did something random happen? And you rapidly start to, so the theory goes, you rapidly start to understand that consciousness has structures of its own that are amenable to genuine scientific investigation without reference to anything outside of itself. And that, in a way, was the thesis of idealism. Like going back to Kant, it's if you want to know what's objective, study the structure of your own mind and try to figure out what the most basic universal structures of it are, such that they can't be credited to culture or habit or language, but would have to be there to experience anything at all. Magic's thesis is like, try to figure out what else is in that consciousness, try to figure out what else it can do. We've barely cracked the surface of what this might be able to accomplish. And that barely cracking the surface gave us everyone from Homer to MLK. Like that, given all that, the odds there's stuff in there we could find with enough investigation. I guess the theory is it's pretty high. In fact, the Dion Fortune, who's sort of another magic writer around the same period, changed Crowley's definition by one word. She called magic the art and science of causing change in consciousness in accordance with will, which is a much more idealist version, where it's like changing consciousness, in fact, changes the world you see. The way, like, I like thinking about, like, when I open my fuse box, I have no idea what anything in it is. It's just a complete and utter mystery to me. And with enough effort, I could maybe figure out 1 or 2 of those wires, or 4, or how not to, kill myself by playing with them. But when somebody who's been well trained in like as an electrician opens it, within seconds, they see a billion things I can't even notice because they have concepts in their head that make it all shine out, not just as a bunch of wires, but as a series of, correct applications of those wires and errors. And it just looks to them differently. They don't have to do a lot of like figuring out or fiddling. So magic theory is like, the more you sort of stack your unconscious with different kinds of concepts, the different the world will look to you as you're just operating from the outside. Like I started practicing it a bit when I was studying it just to see what would happen. And the one thing that happened was I experienced a lot of things that looked like synchronicities. And then I sort of came to the conclusion, oh, it's because I'm priming myself to do that. Like the more I'm focusing on the sort of like connections between things by studying symbols and like saying particular chants that have the interpretations of those symbols within them, the more things seem to me connected in the outside world, and the more I forge connections almost immediately between things. And if somebody says like that's not real, it's just in your mind, the answer is yeah, because my mind is responsible largely for what I see.
For everything that is. Well, it strikes me that it's a great reminder that hey, the world is very magical, and it's just whether we're paying attention to it or not. And when we do pay attention to it, we're quickly reminded just how damn magical it actually is. I'd be curious to know if you can think of one of the synchronicities that you're referencing here.
So I mean, so one kind of obvious one was I was reading about the Hellfire Club, which I didn't really know. I knew it existed. I knew Ben Franklin was in it, but I had no idea what it was. I was reading a little book on different occult societies, and I came on the one-page description of the Hellfire Club. My partner called, and she's like, "What are you doing?" And I was like, "I found out the Hellfire Club." I told her what it was, and then I had to go run an errand and go to a rental car place, so like an hourly rental car. So it's like I was like, "Oh, I gotta go. I gotta run down to the car and go." And so I walked, and I was crossing at a stoplight. And it was that experience where you and somebody else are getting in one another's way, trying to get out of one another's way, where he kept moving and I kept following instead of going the other way. And then I finally was like, sorry. And I saw that his shirt said Hellfire Club. Like that's a little on the nose and a little weird. It happened within seconds of it. And then it forces you to think, why did that happen? And then I kind of like realized I'm getting in his way because like you're picking up a billion signals with your eyes all the time. They're just not being consciously processed, right? You're picking up everything in the room, but I'm only looking at my laptop. I'm not noticing the way the air conditioning feels on my skin or the way the colors of the rug are contrasting with it. I'm focusing on looking at the laptop so I can talk to you. But reading about the Hellfire Club put in my mind the word Hellfire Club and was kind of looking for that. And so my unconscious was like, that's what you just saw. And put me in the way of that person. So I was made conscious of what I saw. So like I could interpret that as like, a supernatural intervention and a sign that I should like, dedicate my life to the Hellfire Club or that I should avoid the Hellfire Club. I had all kinds of things I could do. But the most, the kind of Occam's razor for me was like, oh, that's just what your unconscious does is you fill it full of data and then it sort of like uses that data to interpret the world outside, which the challenge then is real wondering like, well, how much of what I take to be like unsynchronistic reality is just from the same process?
Yeah.
So I've had a bunch of those where it's just, and the only thing that forces is go like, yeah, it's just, this is the kind of magic of experience. It's this interaction of consciousness in a world that creates different kinds of experiences at various times, some of which seem to count as normal and some as paranormal, but only, kind of depending upon the interpretations we add to just a general, I'm rambling now, but there's something.
Well, no, I'm glad we're recording this so I can remember some of these, the way you're saying things. And it strikes me, like, as you're describing like the synchronistic event, it's like our unconscious loves playing, and it almost has a childliness to it, where it wants to play the match game, right? It's like, oh, wait, oh, I remember that. Or it's like it loves to see what's already known. And I don't know, maybe for me, synchronicity has always been a great way to get, like, really kind of sometimes shook back into being present in the moment of my life.
Mhm.
And maybe you know, my friends and I have these conversations all the time. Like, what does it mean? What does it mean? What does it mean? What is synchronicity about? What really is synchronicity? And what does it mean? And maybe what's more important about synchronicity is, like you said, it's like, what does it then lead us to? And it could be something just as simple as being jolted back into the moment, and or the next thought that happens after that, which is remain curious, keep asking
Mhm.
questions, and things like that. We do have to take one more quick break if you've got a few more
Sure.
minutes to keep
Yeah,
chatting.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Okay, awesome. So we're going to do one more quick break here. Remember, patreon.com/Ryan Singer. You can go over there, sign up, and you can get no commercials on these great chats that I'm having. And this one is, oh damn, no exception. So, what would, you know, in the world, build your world with your thoughts. And your thoughts are, $3 a month are nothing to no longer have commercials. That's a beautiful world to live in. And you could live in that world. Okay, we're back. And I'm getting pretty jazzed up over here about this. The idea too that when synchronicity takes zero time to happen, and listen, we can talk about the unconscious just kind of stockpiling information and then being like, oh, I recognize that. Ding, 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 like setting off an alarm of recognition, right? Um, but there's there seemingly is this kind of, I'd love for like a magician or someone who's, really intelligent to come up with like what Hegel was trying to do, like building a whole system or whatever, like you were saying, trying to understand the whole world, but maybe just specifically for the paranormal world, and like trying to figure out like how it all works. And like a lot of us in the paranormal world talk about like a unified paranormal theory, right? To kind of, borrow from the scientific world. And can we find a unified paranormal theory that connects all of this paranormal phenomena together that people are experiencing? And the further along we go, it seems all these things are somehow connected, even though none of us really know why. I think that consciousness is the number one suspect, but when it comes to things like synchronicity, and the more time you're devoting to something, and then the more that it's showing up. Now, is that just like a parlor trick that happens that we do to ourselves to become more believing in the thing itself?
Yeah, I have no idea. It my my limited experience with synchronicity. So very long story, so I won't go into details. But I had a series of I think before I even had the interest in magic and stuff. It was just uh, um, there was a time maybe 5 years ago where I decided I was reading some Robert Anton or listening to some Robert Anton Wilson,
I'm
the
having a
sort of
synchronicity right now because of you saying that. That's it's funny. So
yeah,
continue.
there you go. So it was I was listening to a lecture by him where he was going on about his usual thing, which is the statement the map is not the territory, which he gets from general semantics. And he was trying to like teach people how to like learn the map isn't the territory, that your frame of reality isn't as extensive as reality, and it always leaves things out and always needs to be kept supple and opened up. And one of them was the next time you experience a coincidence, treat it like a synchronicity. So I was like, all right, I'll do that.
Hmm.
I'll just treat it like a synchronicity. And so I woke up the next day. I was going on a trip. I was going to the Phish Studies Conference in Portland, the first one a few years ago. And so I had a couple days in Portland before the conference. So I was like, I'll just find what is there to do. I'll look at what's on at the art gallery. And I went to current exhibitions, and the current exhibition was called "The Map Is Not the Territory," which is like a little on the nose for the, I'm going to treat this like it's a coincidence, like a synchronicity, and it right away that. And it was in a very strange period of my life, and I was in a little bit emotionally labile a lot. And when I arrived in the city, I was kind of like expectant something was going to happen. And a bunch of things that looked like something was going to happen did. I won't go through all of them, but like just one, I went to my Airbnb, and the place I was staying in had like shrines for every world religion. There was a Shinto shrine, there was a Buddhist shrine, there was like a Catholic shrine. And so I was like, okay, this is something. I didn't know this was going to happen. It wasn't in the pictures I looked at. And the whole trip was like that, where I thought, well, one of these is going to say something, or I'm going to like be drawn to some spiritual tradition. And no, I wasn't. And the whole trip went like that. And I came home like, what was the point of caring about that synchronicity? Like it was just a coincidence, clearly. Like coincidences happen. And a few months went by, and I remember walking through a bookstore, and I went to the metaphysical section, and I saw a huge book caught my eye called Synchronicity and Its Meaning. And I remember being angry at the book, like walking by, like that was a fraud. I remember that, like the stupid thing. And then I went home that night, and I was looking for a podcast to listen to on YouTube before I went to bed. And the very first recommendation was a thing by Terence McKenna called Synchronicity and Its Meaning. And I was like, all right, this is my last stop. I'm going to press this. And it was him telling a very similar story of getting a bunch of synchronistic signs that like were all on the nose. And he was like, this all lead me down some kind of path. And it led him to predict there would be like a celestial event in the sky. And he published this in New Wave journals and everything, New Age journals, and everyone, said he was crazy. And then that day that he called it, a comet nobody had ever seen or known existed appeared in the sky. And so everyone in the world thought like he's a prophet, and like this is going to be like the age of Aquarius, or there's going to be like a reckoning with God, or some aliens are coming, something. And he thought that, and then like 2 weeks later, it just passed away, and it just went through the sky, and nobody cared, nothing happened. And so he interpreted that not as it's just a coincidence. He interpreted it the opposite. He was like, the synchronicities were meaningful. What they were doing were pumping up my ego and then undercutting it, so I would learn not to think the universe revolved around me.
Oh, wow.
I would be given signs that makes it look that way, so it would be all that much more crushing and impactful when it was taken away. And that's like the arc I went through of like, yeah, because of the emotional state I was in, I got tricked into believing this would mean something. And then when it didn't, I got to learn, well, this is because you're being kind of a sad sack and you're in your emotions, and you're, so like uh, that's how I've come to think of them, is like, these are reminders that like your mindset informs the kind of world you experience. And therefore you can live in a kind of open world where new things might take place that challenge you and open you up in various ways that are important. Or you could live in a world where it all kind of conforms to your idea, whether your idea is a materialist universe, an idealist universe, like something like that. So to me, it was just a reminder of like, don't always know that you're co-creating what you're experiencing, and therefore you're kind of responsible for not being nasty. Like you don't want to be too egocentric in that process. Like one of the great men of magic writing now is a guy named Lamal Duquette, and one of his memoirs is called "Yes, It's All in Your Head. You just have no idea how big your head is." And which kind of defines the idealist position. Like your head includes all of that. It includes what's happening around you. It's a co-constitutive partner. And so, yeah, there's a worry, I think, in the materialist position where you cleave off, where you try to explain away all the things that seem to make life resonate with meaning, or seem to open it up to spirit, or what looks like magic, or what's now relegated to the paranormal. When you take aspects that everyone knows to be part of their nature, like their consciousness, and make them supernatural, like in that severe materialist position, that does seem kind of dangerous. And just to, to say something about what I appreciate about your work is like there's something about the way you find words to express that problem is interesting. So one of the ways you came on my radar was your bit about the top 6 number one inventions of all time, where it's all just stuff we all know around us all the time. Like we all use language, but you just forget that language is weird. You forget how strange it is that we can like write things on pieces of paper and somebody thousands of years later can figure out at least part of what we meant in doing that. Expresses something, kind of magical. There's nothing kind of obvious about that process. There's hundreds of thousands of years of human history where that didn't exist. And we've come to denigrate that process to the point where writing is kind of going out. We don't write cursive anymore. We're much more of the image than we are of the written word. It's partially because we've forgotten the magic in it.
Synchronicity number 2 or number 3. I mean, I just had this conversation with my niece about 3 hours ago about she's got all these jokes, right? And I tell her, I'm like, well, you got to write it down. And she just holds up her phone and she's like, well, I got this. And I go, maybe I'll get you a tiny little notebook because there's something magical about writing it down, is exactly what I said to her. And that seemed to resonate. And she understood that, and she's a teenager, right? I mean, that is, I think you crystallized synchronicities when you said, and so I walk into this Airbnb and I think to myself, oh, this is something. I think that phrase, oh, this is something, is at the heart of what synchronicity is about, right? Now, what that something ends up meaning or doing for us, like you said, oftentimes maybe ego checking us, which is hilarious because and this is why I said this is a synchronicity happening, because right before that, I had been thinking to myself, like, as we were talking about this, like, oh, to walk around and think that the universe is giving us direct messages, like how egotistical is it to think that the universe is all about us? But then I thought, well, simultaneously it is, but for every single person. So which maybe removes the egotistical nature of it to a certain degree. But then when you said, and then, or telling the Terence McKenna story and, and all this, it just very, very poignant, I think, because we can get wrapped up in thinking like all of this is about me and the message that I'm supposed to have and what I'm supposed to be doing, or some grand big thing. I mean, I guess everything big starts small at some point, but to go from a small synchronicity to believing I'm a prophet is, wow, maybe that's how some certain cult leaders get their start, unchecked synchronicity, understanding, potentially, who knows?
Yeah, it's certainly like, again, as I say, like it happened during a period where, I was in a, like a place where traditionally, I would have been a debunker kind of person. It's only in the last few years where I've, you go through enough experiences and have enough life where you go like, maybe I don't know everything. And so you gradually learn to pull your ego back on that. But it was an interesting process where you learn for a second, oh, that is a worry. It's like the more you open yourself up to that kind of like, experience is weird, this just happened, the more you can start closing things down and subsuming the world under your ego.
You're gonna have to define that word for me. Subsuming. I don't know that
one. Let's just say treating the world like it's simply an extension of your ego.
Gotcha.
Right. So the same way, like the severe materialist treats consciousness like it's just an epiphenomenal or a contingent product of the material world. The other side can be like the material world is just what it shines out to me in my sort of prophetic greatness or something like that. And so there's a worry on either end, making consciousness a kind of nothing comparison to the material world to which it has to submit. And on the other side, making the world submit to consciousness. It's kind of holding some kind of balance between those things by
Wow.
seeing them as mirroring of each other, that uh, you know, maybe the problems don't arise as severely.
I
Um,
hadn't even considered that. God, I feel like you ever have these moments where you feel like such a fool? Like I haven't even considered to think about putting the brakes on my idea of consciousness being everything or being it all. You know what I mean? Um, wow. Um, but that makes sense when you say it. And I,
so, yeah, so, okay, so.
well, I had to write down too, drunk on synchronicity, which is, I think, like a
um,
real fun phrase, being like, oh man, I'm drunk on synchronicity today. There's, two, you can, because it can loop us out. And, I mean, we can get loopy when we get all synced up and oh, drink the sink, maybe that's the phrase. But at the end of the day, coming from that world of being a skeptic or being someone who I don't want to say skeptic because that's not what you said, but being someone who would have maybe been debunking some of this stuff, and then you start getting into researching magic and actually practicing some of it. Um, we talk about crystals, we talk about magic. So is this like a slippery slope? And I don't mean that in a bad way. Is there like any going back? I mean, it seems like you're probably just going to are you going to keep sliding down, or what do you think's going to
I don't
happen
know.
here?
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know how I ended up here, and I don't know where it's going to go. And that's kind of a nice feeling.
Yeah.
So, like, at least since I've gotten tenure, so you get a lot of freedom at that point. You don't have to worry so much. Uh, at least since I've gotten tenure, I've just sort of followed what looked like the most interesting. Mostly I research things that like overwhelm me with how improbable they are, or how sort of inspiring they feel. So like Hegel's kind of my home base, and he still has the sort of like general matrix of ideas that I think are, if not correct, like at least helpful and plausible in various ways, and deserve a greater hearing than they're currently getting. Um, but everything else I research, so my other big projects were sort of, I work on magic, I work on early hip hop culture a lot, like before rap music was a thing, the pre-recording decade. Um, Again, there's something, uh, we kind of forget this, but this was a culture created in a 7-block radius of New York City by mostly people under the age of 16, who invented forms of music making through DJing, forms of dance through breaking, forms of art through wall writing or graffiti, and then over time, forms of poetry and rapping that were completely indigenous to that area, uh, um, made without the help of anybody around. They just sort of got together and competed to see who could do the grooviest thing, and developed a kind of like, complete culture, replete with, there are religious documents, there are philosophical documents. It's all produced by teenagers for the most part in the Bronx in the mid 1970s. So once I learned that, like once I thought about it, not as where did rap music come from, but like, no, what was happening just before anybody thought that was even possible? Before you would imagine you could make a record, when you're throwing 8-hour parties for your friends for no money, just for bragging rights over your skills are better than theirs. That kind of expression of human freedom, self-determination, spirit, uh, uh, overwhelmed me when I found out about it. And I spent like a decade working on almost just that. Like I was just obsessed with it. Um, I work on the Black Panther Party a lot because I find it amazing. 2 people in Oakland figured out how to build an organization that within a year and a half had 5,000 members in chapters around America, changed the gun laws in the country, changed legal structures in the country. But all 2 people in one of the most, brutally repressed areas of the state, uh, facing the police with guns, and who somehow didn't die, but manifested a severe challenge to the police that limited police brutality. Um, Again, that expression of spirit, like as you say, everything starts small. Like it starts with two people. It starts with writing stuff down on a napkin that just seems to you true, and then trying to go act on it. And then a bunch of coincidences, as well as willful actions, make it possible for that to survive and thrive and become what the FBI called the biggest threat to the country, severe threat to the American empire. Um, uh, and now, as you mentioned at the start, I'm trying to work a little bit on Phish, because again, like that's an unlikely band to make it anywhere, let alone like out of a tiny village in Vermont of like a couple of hundred people in the middle of the woods, singing to nobody, playing songs no one likes, like never selling records and yet somehow playing arenas, being the most dominant live act of the last 40 years probably, and yet never having had a hit, made one video, made one appearance on MTV, and somehow lasted longer than everybody else and built a more powerful fan base. And did it all before the Grateful Dead broke up. It's kind of a misnomer. Like they were in arenas before the Dead broke up, and then the Dead's audience needed somewhere to go, so they just went to where the biggest party was. And it was up in the Phish. But like that, it's the improbable accomplishments of spirit that interest me. And so magic's become sort of the latest in a series of those things that I find fascinating. But that's, it's kind of a generic answer.
Well, I love that though. And God, I remember first hearing about Phish in 98, 99, and through a friend of mine. But I mean, just like these people, I mean, inspires such a fan base of like doggedness. Like, they are doing it because they're bringing something different, and they're doing it their way. And I think sort of when I look around the paranormal community and the people who are willing to, face ridicule in the, just by stating things that they've experienced or things that they believe they've seen or have happened to them. And it's, the culture in the paranormal world is interesting, and there's different subsets of it, never all that, but I often will describe it as like the Monster Energy drink can of like, that's the aesthetic sometimes, when it's like everybody has a black t-shirt with like fluorescent writing on it, or it's like, jagged, like horror film type, like, where all the ghost hunter pictures are tough. Like we're going into these scary but that's also part of why I love it. But there does seem to be a genuineness to the whole field on the whole. Not to say that there's not people there trying to, profit off it, but when it comes to like the world of the paranormal and also like the world of philosophy, like no one's getting rich off these worlds. These are passion fields, and for the curious and for those who just seek and are looking for information and looking for knowledge, I would argue. And I'm curious. I'd love to hear where this journey keeps going for you. We got to wrap this up because I've already kept almost. But because I'd love to see where you keep going. And have you done gone on a paranormal investigation of any kind?
No.
I don't know if anything like that interests you, or so no seances, or have you done a seance?
No, never. So
I don't know if any of that interests you.
If you got one going on, let me know.
Well, we'll have to talk about, some potential. Well, I've got an idea for something I want to be doing in the future with some other friends of mine. I think it'd be fascinating to have you involved with it. But there's a journey that you definitely can take, right, into the world of the paranormal. I mean, there's a million different journeys we can take. I think they're limitless. But it's like that show Dark Matter that's on Apple TV right now, which is pretty wild. But I'm fascinated by the journey that you find yourself on right now. This is really, to me, very, very interesting. And you're speaking at because we initially were in touch with each other because you're speaking at, what is it, a Hegel conference or what is it? Oh,
Yeah,
okay.
so yeah, it's the Hegel Society of America. So it's
Oh,
like a
okay.
biannual, yeah, it's the big Hegel thing. So yeah,
Okay, cool.
which means it's
And
small. But
yeah, yeah, but I mean, because I'm so fascinated by this material, but for me, it's like, and I do appreciate you letting me like read the paper that or the presentation that you've come up with. And it's like, I told you, like, had to spend a lot of time going through it. Like, that's when we're talking about the magic of the written word, right? And it's like so dense. Like, there's so much happening in these words written down on a piece of paper or typed out on a piece of paper. And because they're so layered with meaning, with intention, and then not to mention, their relationship to the words that come before them and the words that come after them. To me, there you look no further than a sentence that's difficult to maybe at first comprehend to understand just how deeply magical the written word is because of everything that you now have to you can't even pin down or grab a hold of trying to, I guess, would be understanding. I guess that's why we call it, I had to it took me a while to grasp this idea. um do you feel like, let's close with this, do you feel like there's one idea that really just was a party for you when you felt like you grasped it along your journey, like going through all these different philosophical ideas and stuff? Is there one idea that once you felt like you got your hand on it, you're like, oh, this is something I'm going to hold on to for a while?
uh, you know, I'll come back to the one idea everybody I work on is obsessed with. Is just when I realized that the relationship between consciousness and its meat was not obvious. Like, and again, that's the most basic generic thing, and like there's a billion theories as to that. But uh, like the one thing I can recall is realizing like is a kind of scale falling moment where you could no longer live in either camp, where
Oh,
you
wow.
just sort of like the world is objective and it's fine and science is right, or like it's like you're stuck with this problem that's been the problem everyone has faced in their own way, individually, culturally, collectively as a species. This is a constant problem. Is what do you do with the fact there's a part of us that you can only call spirit? Now, the only real name for it is, the word for spirit in that's translated as spirit in German. Maybe this is the idea. It's just this idea from Hegel. The word is Geist. So it's translated as spirit in part because like it's the word in theology. If you want to say the Holy Ghost, you would use like the Heilige Geist. It's the Holy Spirit. It's also the word for mind or consciousness. So the same book by Hegel might be translated as the phenomenology of spirit or the phenomenology of mind. But it's also the word for ghost.
Hmm.
So the word has all three of those meanings baked into it. And Hegel was obsessed with words that had multiple meanings, especially words that had meanings that didn't seem to sit very well together. Like he
Oh,
loved words.
I love that.
His favorite word is aufheben, which is a verb which can mean one of two things: to preserve or to destroy. Um, and this, and whenever he uses it, he means both. And Geist is another one of those words where, he means consciousness. He also means some larger entities, like our relationship to language and human culture itself, and to our fellow citizens, to the very idea of a nation. Um, and he also means it's something kind of ghostly. It's something which is not material. And all those meanings are baked in. So maybe Geist would be the idea. The fact that there's something in us that's the proper name for, or that's the appropriate name for, is probably the idea that uh, I'll never recover from. Yeah, put it that way.
I think that's a perfect way to describe it. I'll never recover from it. Yeah, I mean, when you're talking about it's none of the meat and not of the extreme on either side. It's like a man without a home or a country. It's like a mind without a skull, right? I mean, it's like in this, and I love liminal space and liminality and the idea of everything that is about that, and the opportunities that arise and the phenomena that exists that fuels off of liminality as well. Jim, this has been really, really cool.
Okay, thanks for having me on this.
I love it. I hope we can talk again.
Sure. Yeah.
Sometime in the future. This was really, really cool. So I appreciate it. Is there, usually when I'm talking to, whether it's people who are comedians or otherwise, they always want to plug some, not always want to, I mean, they have things to plug. I don't know if that's the case here or not. If
Yeah.
there's anything like, any of your writing or anything like that you want, people can get more of.
Yeah. I don't have social media, so you could Bing me, but I don't know. Yeah. If you like Hegel, look me up. That's
Yeah.
yeah. I don't know. Other than that, I have no idea. I have nothing to plug. I have no dates coming up. So
yeah. Well, this has been awesome. I appreciate your time and your insight and your expertise on a lot of this stuff. So yeah, this has been really cool, and I look forward to chatting again sometime in the future.
Yeah, sounds great. Thanks for having me. It's been a lot of fun.